Welcome back to Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I'm your host, Jay Taylor, and I'm really pleased to have with me again, Daniel McAdams. He's with us almost every week, but he's been traveling and in Hawaii and on his way back to Washington right now, because Daniel is really a regular on this show. He is executive director of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. Because he's on a regular basis on this show. I'm not going to read his bio, but you can read about Daniel on the Voice America Business channel. On the his bio is posted there. Because our foreign policy is so much, in my view, opposed to the Constitution of the United States, and because I believe our warmongering is playing a major role in economic and moral destruction of our country, not to mention the destruction of freedom and liberties here at home. Well, I think it's so important to have Daniel on, and also to bring to your attention the Ron Paul Institute. And you can go there and read excellent articles about what's really going on around the world, as opposed to what you're going to hear on the mainstream media. And that site is ronpaulinstitute.org. So I'm really pleased to have you with me again, Daniel. Welcome back.
It's great to be with you, Jay. Thanks for having me.
It's really good to have you. You see, I should just mention to our listeners, by the way, that Ron Paul is actually going to be here in the metropolitan area, New York City. He's actually going to be, as I see on the website, he's going to be at Barnes & Noble today at 7 o'clock. That's at 91 Old Country Road at Carl Place on Long Island. That's a bookstore that I've gone to many times, living here in Queens as I do. I wish I had the time to go out and meet Dr. Paul, but I guess he's he's written a new book, or at least is involved with a new book that has to do with homeschooling. Do you know anything about that, Daniel?
Sure, exactly. I think it's actually, the release date is today, and it really is the next chapter in his push for these civil liberties and civil rights. The right for American parents to homeschool their children and to do it as they please, and we're talking about the future of our liberty movement, of people that are attracted to free markets and attracted to peace and prosperity, and homeschooling is just exploding, and the success is just incredible. So he's really riding the wave by writing this book now, and it's exciting that he's going to be in New York and signing these books.
It's interesting that he would come to New York, though. I would think there would be a more of a hotbed for homeschooling in the Midwest or in the South. But I guess apparently there's some interest around here, or he wouldn't launch this thing here in New York City.
Sure. Well, maybe you got to go where it's needed most.
Yeah. Well, that could be. Well, certainly one thing I know for sure is that the dictatorship that is evolving in America, and unfortunately I think you probably agree that what we've got, powerful dictatorship forces towards that and towards that direction, taking away our liberties. One of the cornerstones to our growing loss of freedom and dictatorship in our country is this statist educational system, which is a monopoly educational system for sure. And of course, if you homeschool, you're allowing your kids to think freely. And I guess there's some pretty strong evidence, Daniel, that homeschooling kids do far better than people in general than kids do in the public schools on their tests. Is that right? Sure,
across the board. I mean, in every measure of performance, kids that are homeschooled do better. And that's why it's such a growing movement. It's just incredible if you look at the scale of growth in homeschooling over the past 5 or 10 years. It's just amazing. And, homeschoolers made up a huge portion of Dr. Paul's supporters in his various campaigns. Because they're fighting for that kind of personal liberty.
Right. Well, you have a couple of young kids at home. Are you homeschooling them?
Yes, indeed. And we're excited about Dr. Paul's new homeschool curriculum as well. It's got great people like Tom Woods on board, and so it's a great opportunity to teach your kids Austrian economics and good real history, and so it's exciting.
Daniel, I just have to mention, I just heard about this last weekend, or a couple of days ago when I was in Toronto. The Mises Institute had a couple of young kids there, and they were talking about Ron Paul's homeschooling curriculum. Very exciting indeed. Well, anyway, I want to get to the Institute for Peace and Prosperity. The leading article today was written by Dr. Paul, and it's titled, "Has the Tide Turned Against Warmongers?" In that article, Dr. Paul cites some evidence that indeed may be the case. Can you tell our listeners, give us some news along those lines?
Sure. Well, that's Dr. Paul's weekly column. He writes a column every week, and this week he talks about, he gives us a good news story, which is that, when the president proposed to start attacking Syria, he was met with such a resounding no from the American people that even Congress, which usually sheepishly goes along, although congressional leaders in both houses were enthusiastic about the president's request, the rank and file started hearing such resistance from their constituents back home, and it only increased as the administration kept trying to explain its rationale. So it really is an almost unprecedented, historic situation where the people of the U.S. Demanded that their congressional representatives vote against this. And when the president saw that he was about to lose this vote, he wanted to... he certainly didn't want to have the vote and have it recorded as a no. He wanted to preserve, that veneer of legality if he does decide to strike. But nevertheless, what an incredible victory for this great movement toward a more rational and sane foreign policy.
Indeed, and of course, it wasn't only in the United States. In England as well, there's been a resistance here, hasn't there been?
Sure, and it was a great help. I mean, the day that I think it was the day that the president announced he would seek authorization from Congress was the day that the UK Parliament voted not to participate. So it gave a huge boost. But Jay, this is and there have been a couple of articles written about this. This is a great victory over the president's visible efforts to foment war in Syria. However, as unfortunately we see today, he continues his covert and semi-covert efforts to introduce more hostilities into Syria. You probably saw today that he's decided to waive parts of the Arms Export Act to allow him to continue to export arms to the so-called Syrian rebels.
Mm-hmm. Daniel, as you were talking here, I just had to think of a movie I saw years ago, Enemy of the State. You mentioned that the leadership, the further you get down the line into the rank and file Congress, but when you get to the leadership and key committees and so forth, they're almost always on the side of the military-industrial complex of the neocons. And as I recall, there was a senator that didn't go along. In the movie, there was a senator that didn't go along with the legislation that the rich and powerful corporate interest wanted to put forward. And, he gets a rope around his neck and murdered.
Sure.
And somebody with a camera picks it up, and that's the whole movie. It's a
great movie.
But
yes,
you wonder how far removed that, how unrealistic that is. Because why is it that you always have in these key committees the leaders always backing the same goons?
Sure. Well, they're a little bit more immune to the whims of the will of the constituents because there's so much money riding on these leaders. They always pick the most safe types. But Jay, I was with Dr. Paul in Congress for serving on his staff for 12 years, and I can tell you that in rank and file offices, Americans would be surprised at what kind of weight a nice coordinated effort to let the congressman know a position on a certain item has. Polite phone call, knowing the issues, following up with an email, what have you. There really is an incredible power there, and I think what happened is some of these offices were bombarded with, even 100 phone calls. I remember in our office, if we got 50 phone calls in a day, we knew something was up. And we paid attention. Not that we're waiting to be swayed, but we know that something's happening. We need to find more out about it. So
I would imagine. Yeah, I would imagine, Daniel, if Ron Paul got 50 phone calls, that would be amazing because most people would know they're not going to sway him. Ron Paul would. But a lot of these guys can probably more easily be swayed because Ron stood on principle. It had nothing to do with being reelected. That's what I think made him stand out above everyone else in Congress, virtually everyone else, probably was his purity of principle, and
Sure.
it didn't matter. It didn't matter if he lost a vote or two here and there. Somehow, remarkably, I think people really admired him and returned him to Congress. But okay, so we've got this. We got President Obama saying, "Well, I don't really care about selling arms to terrorists. In this case, it's for the Americans, the American people's good. We're gonna sell these horrible human beings these deadly weapons, right? I mean, he's waving the terrorist.
Sure. Actually, we're selling them to the Saudis, and the Saudis are giving them to the terrorists in Syria."
Oh, how wonderful. Okay, so now to give you an idea, I mean, I saw this headline today from a publication. I can't remember if it was the Christian Post. I don't know about this publication. It's on the internet. And the headlines were Syrian jihadist slits throat of Christian man refusing to deny Christ, then taunts his fiancée with, quote, Jesus didn't come to save him. What about that? I mean, these are the people that we're sending our money. These are the people that Obama wants to support, the people that are slitting Christians' throats.
Yeah, it's an anecdotal piece of information, but it's certainly very compelling, and we see a pattern. Look at this Christian village in Syria that was overrun by these jihadists who demanded that they either convert or be killed. Mm-hmm. And so there is a pattern of these guys, and not only Christians that they're terrorizing a lot of Muslims that don't want to go along with this radicalized view.
Yeah.
So they're pretty equal opportunity in their terrorism, unfortunately. Yeah. And you're right; these are the people on the upper hand in the Obama administration. They keep trying to tell us, "Oh no, don't worry, we can control who gets it. You know, we can vet these guys. Don't worry about it." But if you look at the system they have for vetting them, it's full of holes. You know, and Senator Bob Corker over the week or yesterday, I believe. Said, "Oh, don't worry that he's waived this. We're going to get him to the right people. The intelligence agencies have a good handle." And then listen to this. He said, "Quote: There's going to be mistakes. There's going to be people who are going to get arms that shouldn't be getting them, but we still should do everything we can." End quote. Mm-hmm. So, think back to the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. And what that led to, support for these radicals. Then it led to 9/11. We can't afford mistakes to be made in this.
Well, I'm just, I don't see how our foreign policy could be worse than it is in terms of the results we're getting. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. It's Einstein's definition of insanity. You keep doing the things that fail and expect to change. I don't really.
Sorry, I was going to say, can you imagine an investor approaching his portfolio in this way?
Right. Well, maybe if people are self-destructive, they do. But in terms of equal opportunity, I should mention also that John McCain is all for these people, aiding and abetting these people that will slit Christians' throats as well. So it's not a Republican or Democrat thing, is it? It's about killing foreigners for money. It's about killing people overseas for money.
Absolutely, and the mainstream media plays a big role in this. I'm sure the McCains of the world, they read the Washington Post, they read the mainstream. They don't read the kinds of things that you read, Jay. Where you try to dig deeper and see what's really behind these things. And so a lot of them just simply aren't informed. They're satisfied with the mainstream. They don't want to look deeper, and it's really tragic.
What do you, with 3 minutes left here, I have to ask you about this deal, so-called deal between Russia and the U.S. To have Syria send their poisonous weapons to the United Nations. What do you make of that?
Well, I think everyone's speculating as to whether the Russians saved Obama in the nick of time. That's possibly true. I think, and I wrote something about this the other day on Dr. Paul's Institute website. Yeah, I think it's just vague enough that it will satisfy the Obama administration. And it's also imprecise enough that if, in a year's time, every one of these weapons haven't been destroyed, there will be some wiggle room. So I think it walked us back from a serious crisis and walked the president back from a serious crisis. And in that, it is a good thing. But I think with the administration continuing, even ramping up its support for the rebels, you could see this deal fall apart. So
Here's the thing I wanted to ask you about. I don't believe we addressed it. The Leon Panetta last night telling Charlie Rose that even if the Congress says no to President Obama, if in the president's judgment he believes it is a national security issue, he not only has a right but an obligation to defy the United States Congress and to go forward and get involved in Syria with bombing and killing the Syrian people. What about how clear could the Constitution be with respect to waging war?
Well, my guess
and yet,
is he's going on the War Powers Resolution from the early 70s, which was supposed to rein in the president's ability to make war on his own after the debacle in Vietnam. But even according to, what Dr. Paul would consider the unconstitutional War Powers Resolution, even that broad reading of the president's war-making powers, Panetta is way outside of the rule. If you look at the War Powers Resolution, it says the president is allowed to introduce troops into hostile environment or where hostility is imminent only in 3 cases: a declaration of war, specific statutory authorization, or 3, a national emergency created by an attack on the U.S., its territories, possessions, or armed forces. That's it. And there's no way what he's talking about fits into any of those 3 categories. So where's he getting this from?
Yeah, I don't know. And I'm just wondering, do you feel unsafe if we don't go into Syria?
I feel unsafe if we go into Syria and put these kinds of people in power that they're supporting. That's what makes us feel unsafe. That's how we got 9/11.
Right. And it seems so obvious. And yet the American people are so brainwashed to believe what they hear on the mainstream media that in fact,
coming our way, Jay. I think there's good news there. I think people are listening.
Well, I think that's probably right. And then I wonder to what extent some of these goons aren't going to start coming after those of us who are objecting to the sort of, I would say, dictatorial, empire-building, regime-changing, non-constitutional government that we have. So it's, but we have to stand up for what we believe is right. And Daniel, I want to thank you very much for your efforts in that regard. And of course, Dr. Paul, it's the Ron Paul Institute, and it's ronpaulinstitute.org, I believe, right, Daniel?
Thank you. Yes, Jay, that's it.
People should go to. All the best to you, Daniel. We'll talk to you again, hopefully next week as well.
Thanks much. Bye-bye.